Alright guys, hello and welcome, and this is Ender Magnolia. Early access, as you can see in the top right there in the top right corner. Right now, for the average gamer, I would say, the person who kind of reads everything, but maybe, you skip over a few pieces of text or you just glance over them, who's decent enough that you don't die a ton, you're probably going to clear this in about 3.5 hours to 4. Depending on how experienced you are. This is a Metroidvania game, and one you might recognize if you played Ender Lilies. Ender Lilies was a pretty popular Metroidvania game, which is very similar to this one, where you play, a smallish girl who summons spirits that are pretty cool looking to deal with the enemies. It was on the Switch, it was on Steam, so it did pretty well. It was popular. I think it got a few awards. I can't quite remember, but I know it was, very popular amongst people. I think this one is going to be equally very popular, but right now it's in early access. On some level, it's a little frustrating when these kinds of games come out like that. There's another one like this, like Frontier Hunter Urza, that is, been doing that and slowly releasing content piecemeal. I think it's way more fun to wait for it to all be out. So if you are a big Metroidvania person, I would recommend waiting until this one is fully released so you can just enjoy it all. But I think the quality is here and it's really worth keeping an eye on. And I wanted to talk about it because, well, I played it and I had a lot of fun with it. What's really important about this one is understanding that while it is a sequel, it has its own story. You don't really need to know the first one so far, from what I can tell, to really appreciate what's here. But if you did like the first one, you'll be happy to know they took some feedback to heart. There's good improvements here, but the game, if you liked it before, you're going to like it again. They listened to some things and seem to have made others a lot easier to approach. Now, again, there are some limitations, though. There are some skills that aren't unlocked yet that you can see. There's equipment slots that we have nothing for yet. So, of course, I can't talk about how everything comes together, but I will say that it feels like you have a lot more features and fun early on in this game as opposed to having to wait. I remember in the first one, it took a while before you could even, air dash. You would do this weird little, throw yourself to the floor thing. Now you seem to get a lot of your abilities, your double jump, and other things, much, much sooner. Boss fights are pretty good, too. I feel there's still some easy boss fights like in Ender Lilies, but in general things are well designed, and if you know what you're doing, you're gonna do okay. Even if you take a few hits and you're foolish like me, so that's where you just sit there and you do some dumb stuff, you'll be all right. The stun gauge is also a lot more useful in this one than it used to be, where you can stun enemies out and get them knocked down, and there's also elemental effects like that freeze you saw, which are kind of fun to implement. If you watch this boss fight, you'll see they don't always go off, but the general flow of it is pretty decent, and this is early game. Dodging isn't too hard, so if you're paying attention, you'll be okay. And you might have to learn, where the impact point is for something, but once you get the hang of it, it's really not too bad. Even if you make a few mistakes, it's very forgiving, and there is a difficulty mode, but it's not out yet in early access. So presumably there will be a harder difficulty for people who like to torment themselves a little bit. There was one boss fight that I think I took a few tries on, but for the most part I one-shot everything, even while being, a little dumb, as I often am. The first time I fight something, I tend to be that kind of player who tries to experiment and learn what everything is and what it does, and sometimes I hyperfixate on something idiotic, I gotta get this one attack to work because I just want to. So even with that kind of play style that I tend to go through, everything was pretty clean. I think the gameplay is solid, combat is fun, even normal enemies are interesting to engage with, and there's a lot more freedom in this game and a lot more quality of life. It makes it a little bit more enjoyable, I think, than the first one. If you like the first one, you're gonna like this one. So let's talk about the important changes. One of the primarily important changes is the minimap. So if you look at this minimap, you can see that there is highlights on little areas you can step on, and there's a general idea of how large an area is. This is pretty helpful because we can kind of keep track of what's actually in a zone. Now, In the first one, a lot of the minimap was just simple squares. You wouldn't know how big the simple square was. It might imply there was some verticality on it if it was a vertical square, or a vertical rectangle, or if it was horizontal, you would have kind of like a vague idea of its shape, but it might have multiple layers. And some parts were maddeningly complex, so you wouldn't know what you missed out on, or if there was an area you could go. It was a lot harder to find certain secrets. The only thing that you would know is that it would change color when you found everything that was important in that zone. That was very frustrating, and if you don't believe me, just check the discussion pages or Reddit pages for anything about that game, and you'll see people complain about that once in a while. It wasn't the worst thing, it didn't make the game bad, but it was a little annoying. So it's good to see that they addressed that, and it seems like it's a change for the better. So if you played the first one and you were like, man, this map kind of bothers me, well, it's fixed now, so hey, they listen, and that's important. Devs that will listen to what their community says, improve upon it, but keep the fun part, well, that's a valuable thing to see. So I just want to point that out and say, hey, you know, these devs are paying attention and they know what they do well. On other things they do well, the music is still beautiful. I'm pretty sure it's still the same composer from the first one. I forget their name, but I know that they are someone so popular that numerous Steam discussions are like, early access for the game? Nah, but early access for the music? Now that's what this is. Like, that's how much some people really like this, you know, the themes going on. And I will say that I really do enjoy it. The music does set the tone well for each area. It's very atmospheric. I think it is something quite lovely. So I'm very happy to say that it still sounds great. Other things that carry over well are, of course, the attacks, the impact feel, the way that you get different spirits that all have like pretty cool animations, the animation style in general. All of that is still very strong and it looks great. They do seem to be going for more of a like sci-fi-ish feel, or maybe like a steampunk feel. Like there's like more robotic creatures that are around. They call them homunculi in this one. In the first one, it was more like dilapidated knights, very Dark Souls. And I'm glad to see them kind of going in a different direction, because we have a lot of, you know, 2D Dark Souls Metroidvanias. Do we really need to have more of them? I mean, we had Salt and Sanctuary, which was really good, and its sequel, which I didn't like as much, which had that same feel. And I think them having, you know, characters with flamethrowers, characters with chainsaws, it's something a little different. It's not like super futuristic, but you can kind of feel that there's something a little different going on here this time. And I appreciate that. I think that's going to be kind of fun. If you're not sure what the game is kind of like, even by looking at it right now, the basic premise is it's a Metroidvania. In both games, you're usually a smallish girl that has these things that she summons in, whether they're spirits or homunculi in this one. You summon them in and they basically do the fighting for you, but your body is still the thing that's at risk. So you are moving, dodging, jumping, and maneuvering around as your main character, but you summon in these powerful spirits that do things for you in order for you to actually effectively fight. Some can be summoned in at the same time as others. Some you'll have to kind of wait, or their attack will be somewhat interrupted as you summon them in. And the general premise is you move around, you collect upgrades that let you move to places you might not be able to reach before, or get keys, or learn how to swim down. And all those things come together and you can explore. There are boss fights. In the first one, the boss fights were a mix between some challenging ones and then mini bosses that were a lot easier. In general, when you cleared a boss, you would unlock the spirit that was attached or get some sort of meaningful upgrade that you could utilize. So you might get like a new basic traversal skill. You might get a new spirit that you could summon that does something different. Now, this time around, it seems like there are a lot more bosses where you just get some upgrades, because it seems they've changed how the spirits work. In the first one, you would get like a brand new spirit for different things. So like you'd have like a spirit that has a big axe. You have a spirit that has a sword. You'd have a spirit that has a mace. And those were kind of like your main basic attack skill, which you could use infinitely. Now it seems like your main attack is going to be the same character, that feminine-looking robot you see that comes out, not the one with the guns, not this one, but the one with the giant axe you've seen me using. She will either have the big axe, a sword, or a scythe, which I unlock later, which ended up being my favorite one. although I like the heavy axe. Each of these different variants of that character has different stats attached. So like they might do more break damage, which affects like the stamina meter underneath an enemy, which renders them vulnerable for a few seconds and stuns them. It seems a little better than the first game, where when you stunned them, it would like be like for like half a second sometimes. I've noticed enemies seem to stay stunned a little bit longer, which was also another piece of feedback I think that a lot of people gave. The stun system felt a little bit odd. Now it seems like it affects even bosses. You're not going to get like a ton of free damage, but it does open you up to get, you know, a bigger combo going. I like this change to an extent that the spirits will share multiple different like weapon types. I think that's kind of cool. It lets those characters mean a little bit more, as there were numerous ones that just kind of, it was like, oh, here's like another spirit you get that you're never going to use. Especially as a problem in the first one was that, you know, some of those spirits were you would get them so late that you couldn't really upgrade them as much, and so you kind of felt forced to stick with certain things. Here you'll notice I'm having a conversation with one of the spirits I have. They seem to have added more of this to the game. When you sit at a rest bench, you will occasionally have a little notice that says, hey, you want to chat with your guys? And you can do it, and you'll get like a special little moment where they tell you a little bit about themselves. I think this is actually a really cool change. Having a set amount of characters that come with you and giving them a personality, I think is a good idea for this type of game. Some people might disagree because they're going to be like, oh, well, I liked having, you know, more and more spirits. But I think there was a weakness in that you just didn't have enough resources, because there were limited resources to level everything up. So for example, if you leveled up your main skill with a big hammer, you might not have enough to upgrade the main skill of a character that you would later get that had like a mace as your basic attack, because there just wasn't enough. So it was kind of like the game would encourage you to just fully focus on one, and that kind of sucks, I think. And then if you were really keeping everything leveled up, you'd kind of almost be punished for it, because you might get a skill you really like later in the game, but you wouldn't have enough resources to just get it up to snuff. So I think this time the change is a little more functional. I don't know if they're still going to have a degree of that, where like the limited amount of stuff means you can't upgrade everything, but the game seems to encourage you to get at least level 1 of everything and experiment at this point. So I think that's working a little bit better. Another important change is limited use skills are gone. So if you were annoyed by that in the first one, that's changed. So no longer do you have special skills like, you know, the frost punch you've seen me use tied to 15 uses. In the first game, that was a problem where everything was limited. Aside from your main skills like your sword swipes and mace swings and axe swings or whatever, it would be like, oh, you have 30 charges of this attack which can go on as you do this, or you have 15 counter attacks you can do between rest points. Now that sounds bad, but what was really weird about that system to begin with was you'd often find objects in the world that would replenish them. I think sometimes just by killing enemies you'd replenish them, and basically you would really never run out. It just felt like a weird limitation. And really all it encouraged you to do was to hold off on using a lot of your skills until you were fighting a boss or a harder enemy. I think they realized that that was more detrimental. So now you can do cool things like I just did there, which is like freeze an enemy and then go in and just finish them off with your big swings. And it just makes more sense. It's like, why not just let you have fun? I think that it's balanced better like that, and that's pretty cool. So yeah, good change. The core skills all having something in common, like the same character, is decent in a way, although I do think it has some interesting fallbacks. Let's take a quick look at a video that I have on that specifically. So here I have a look at the skills just so you can see them. You'll notice that there are little subdivisions that say like main, repeat. Those subdivisions will change, like they are different purposes. So this main skill is like your basic attack, and you can see there's me using the axe and showing that you can like do a strike and dodge away. You can also switch from the axe to a different main weapon. So if you want to use the sword and you like the speed of that better, you have that as your main attack. It's a little bit less break damage, but it's very quick. So if you want your attacks to come out fast, which can be very helpful, that's pretty valuable. And then finally there's the scythe, which is the one I think is currently the best because it's got a good mix of things. When you use a scythe, it's pretty quick, but it just still does decent break damage. Your repeat attack is the gun. The gunner is this little angel looking guy that comes out. You can make him do bounce attacks, which I'm using currently, they bounce around. Or you can do a drill, which you hold, which you cannot maintain while doing other attacks for very long. It'll vanish in the middle of your combo. But that one has high break damage, so if you don't want to have much of a range attack, you can do this little drill. He also has just the basic gun, which I think I prefer because it's simple but very effective for ranged enemies. Then you have the, let me see if I go to it, and hopefully I do, or if I don't, then I don't. You have an auto character, this little owl, which can follow you, which will automatically do things as you're, traversing. Right now, all we have access to is like a little shot that it does. That's pretty handy. You'll notice that you have 4 skills on the bottom, so you can't pick one of everything. But you do have a main skill, a repeat skill, a cooldown skill, and an auto skill. So you could pick any 4 that you want. You can't double up on the same one though. So I can't have like the scythe and the big hammer because those are both main skills. The cooldown skill, I mean, a few of them have cooldowns to begin with, but the cooldown skill seems to be one where it does like a heavier elemental attack. And then of course counter is, well, a counter strike where you get hit while using it and you do a counter attack. Movement is pretty clean, as you can see, and there's a lot of ways to attack. That robot that you see, that's a basic skill you'll always have. It's a down strike, which also is used to break barriers to unlock hidden areas. I like this new system, but again, it means there's potential for less overall spirits or homunculi. If we look at this page, I'm gonna guess that at most we'll have 10 spirits. Like I could see them slotting in 2 more down here at the bottom of the screen, so like maybe like another one here, another one here. And if we did that, we'd have 5 and 5. So maybe we'll have 10 spirits. I'm not sure. It's possible we're only gonna have 6. It's, who knows what they're gonna do. Each of these seems to have 3 variant attacks though, so there is a lot to play with in terms of how you want to customize your build and what you find to be useful. Some of these aren't usable yet, but everything I've seen is pretty handy, and it does feel like it'll change the way you kind of play. I think this is pretty cool. I'm happy with it. I like the elemental effects are part of this, and they feel a little more usable. So I think the improvements to this game are pretty clear. Now, I really do like the general aesthetic of what's going on around here. It does vary enough. It is very gloomy, but in the first one, you would eventually get to areas that were like snowy and stuff. So I'm assuming we're going to get some changes like that. I think this is a worthwhile purchase at the moment, but I do think that you would not be wrong to wait a little bit. Levels, I do think that I do think there could be a few more secrets hidden around. I think that there is a lot of fun to be had, but I do think at times I was a little bit like, this feels a little bit more straightforward than before, and maybe not in a detrimental sense, but maybe in a sense that I could stand to have a few more secrets. There are some things that are hidden, behind walls that aren't marked until you walk into them. But I don't know. I feel like there's a little something lacking to really make this a 10 out of 10 experience. But the same thing I could say for this is the same thing I would say for Ender Lilies. It's fun, but maybe a little bit more lore here and there. Maybe a few more character interactions would really help sell this for me. But I really enjoy the boss fights. I really enjoy the exploration. I think they do a good job keeping it balanced and letting you feel like you can do a lot. Here, you start to learn the pattern, that little drill that guy does. I definitely knew that there was always a single piece of rock that would come straight at you near the end, so it was just better for me to move away. Now, I experimented a few times with this boss because I actually did struggle with this guy a few times, because he does have a secondary phase, so it took me a few tries to really get him down. He gets this phase where he has all these explosions, and it's a little different, and I was trying different attacks out on him. This was the only boss that really took me a few tries, because he does do a lot of damage and I was just not getting everything down. And then eventually I did manage to beat him. with you know, a little bit of life to spare. But you can see like I wasn't doing tons of damage, and there were like a lot of little things to dodge. I think it's pretty cool though. And even though I'm not like a master of being like super hyper reactive, I had a good time learning this guy. It wasn't too much. It didn't overstay its welcome. I think he's a really good difficulty level. You get punished heavily for getting hit, but you will learn the patterns, and the dodge is very forgiving, and you could always just cheese it if you don't want to get in close. Although I like to try to get in close. This guy did make a lot of moments where that was not very wise, and I also think the heavy hammer made it harder for me to always do that, so that's why the scythe ended up being a little bit more fun when I got it. But then once you get something like that, you unlock new things, and you can now break through barriers you previously couldn't, discover new areas, and there is something just fun about that. Again, here's another glimpse of the map. It's so much better than it used to be. You can tell what you've seen and what you haven't. Very handy. Overall, I think this is a really good game to put your time into. I think you're going to have fun with it. If you really liked Ender Lilies, even at this point, I would say the content that's there is pretty polished. There's just some things that you obviously won't be able to do because, you know, you've only got about 4 hours of content here. But hey, you know, you get it started on a little bit, try it out, listen to the music. I think you're going to have a solid time with this. I will be doing a review of Ender Lilies later, so if you never heard of that, or you look at this and you're like, this looks pretty cool, I'll do a full review of that one and talk a little bit more in detail. I think you're going to hear some similar things, though, about that one. This one just happens to be something new that I've heard a little bit about, but then I haven't heard much from people, so I wanted to talk about it. I think it's pretty cool, and just the animation style is great, and I love Metroidvanias. Apparently that's a thing that I talk about a lot. I didn't realize how many of these games I played, but it's quite a bit. In other news as to what I've been playing, I am still working on FF7. I'm trying the new FF16 DLC, which I'm enjoying. There's going to be some other games coming out soon that I'm going to be doing, which, you know, I'll see how they perform and how people like to see about them. One thing I am noticing, though, is that I'm not always beating a lot of my games. This is for anyone who watches my content all the way through, which is, I don't know, maybe not even many people. But just as a question, do you guys prefer it if somebody like takes a long time, waits to like get to the end of the game, or would you rather hear early game reviews? Do you guys prefer a different title for games that like are, you know, not fully complete? I've just been using a blanket should you play, and using that to say like, oh, here's what I found that was fun about it, here's my experiences at the moment, but I wouldn't always beat the full game at that point. Maybe I'll do like a different series name for when I've completed them versus when I haven't. I have to think a little bit about that, but as it stands, I think it's pretty good to just start something out and say like what my impressions were on it, because in my view, that's kind of what I want to see. I want to see like what some of the gameplay is like. I want to hear what it feels like to actually play the game, and just get some basic ideas on that. Let me know if you find it to be a little different or not. But yeah, that's all gonna be all from me for now, so have a good time. See ya.